Steve Van Samson,
Curtis M. Lawson,
Paul Christian Glenn, Joshua Rex, Raz, Rob Smale. Hey everybody, welcome to the Clutch on Sunday. Tonight we have with us author Joshua Rex, right over here, coming at us. I had to put up the Renaissance Man. We have yet another from Providence over on the East Coast who is a historian as well as a songwriter and an artist and a fabulous author. And we're going to be talking about his books and his latest stuff that's come out. Oh, there you got Susan. Hey, Susan. And yeah, this is Joshua Rex, everybody. He's with Weird House. We saw Curtis Lawson was on before with us, and they both did the Coffin Makers book together. And actually, I'm gonna show off some swag real quick here because I buy everything from you guys when I can get my hands on it. Y'all probably remember we went through this one before with Curtis, and this was just the lovely detail. Wanted to show it off again because Luke Spooner, who does you guys' artwork, is just amazing. And let's find one of the nice pieces in here. I'm showing this to y'all because you can still get copies of this book if you go onto the Weird House website. Here's some of the beautiful artwork that goes into that. And then you have Joshua's current release, which is New Monsters. And I, of course, had to go and get the autographed numbered copy of this as well. So yay, all my signatures. And once again, beautiful artwork, wraparound cover by Luke Spooner. So hi Joshua, how are you doing?
Great, how are you? Thanks for having me, Del.
Oh, I was so excited. I love having you guys on because you're all fabulous. Oh, hello, Mike. Nice to have you joining us. So I first got introduced to reading Joshua's stuff by Curtis because I was following him for some things. And after reading the Coffin Makers Book of Dark Tales, that is a mouthful, by the way, I had to start reading more. And so I've read all of New Monsters. I have Inamorta lined up and ready, waiting for me to go into next. And I love the way you write. You can tell that you're a musician because the way that you weave some of your stories has a definite rhythm to it, and there's some musical elements that flow through a lot of it. And I'm a heavy dreamer, and I feel like you pull a lot of things out of your dreams as well, where it has that feel to me where it's kind of broken up, but it all makes sense together. So,
yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for reading and for reading so diligently and all the kind comments. Some things I have a hard time with dreams because I'll have dreams. We all have them, I think, where you have an idea for something or something seems especially filmic, maybe in a certain one, but as soon as I wake up, they're vanished to the point where. They're gone, and I don't really have a grasp on them. I think there probably have been some stories here or there where they are dream influenced, but generally I got to fill in a lot of gaps. Even if I have a skeleton of something, it really just kind of takes on its own form by the end of whatever it is, unfortunately.
Okay. I grab my dreams, but I guess that's why I think when I see people's writing, I'm always like, oh, that's like a dream that I had or something. I didn't read the thing ahead of time. There's a ticker that I wanted to run, and I don't know where it went. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Need people to comment because I'm giving away merch so that you can get your hands on some of Josh's stuff. 2 people are going to be getting autographed versions like the book that I had that I just showed you, and I will be giving away some e-copies as well. So you don't do the dream thing, but there's a story that I want to talk about real quick in the book that you just released in New Monsters. And this is the one that was exactly like, I was like, I've been there in my dreams too. I know where you're at. And it was like Death in the Present Tense. which I've also noticed, and I don't know if you know this or not, you talk a lot about death. In there's a lot of death in your stuff, but it's not like over it, you're able to keep it fresh as you go through each one. It's not just like, oh yeah, somebody's gonna die. It's like, ooh, how's this? Oh wow, that's neat. I see what you did there. But that one, you have people. He's also a historian, boys and girls. I think I mentioned that. So he knows things. And in that particular story, the main character is going through different mausoleums and different grave sites in kind of weird places, and things are moving around and stuff as he goes through them. And I've had dreams before where I'm like in cemeteries, but I'm like, there's specific ones where like people are acting out their last moments over and over and over again, or you do have to follow different things and things move on. So was a lot of that what was that one based on? Where'd you get the different ideas for the different types of grave settings that there were? Because there were a couple different sets of places in the different graveyards.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I had written a collection of quote death stories, I guess you'd call them, and initially I had wanted to publish them just with a totally black cover, so nothing on it whatsoever, and then you open it and there's a table of contents, and just to be real simple. But it turned out that when I finished the manuscript, this was several years ago, I didn't really care for how it came out. I thought a lot of the stories needed a lot of work, and there were a few though that I still really did like and wanted to explore some more. I guess I just didn't feel like I quite had the skill to do them the way I wanted to do them, and Death in the Present Tense was one of them. And so when I revisited it, I still, like I said, I still liked the theme. I still liked how it was moving. I still liked the protagonist and the notion of it. But I just kind of came at it at a different angle. And that is one of those things where I don't know. I think the more you write, the better your eye gets for what's happening in the story and how to tell it and how to visualize some of the things. And that one, it just sort of moves on. The main character is walking along this trail that he discovers through this sort of wooded area that leads off from a parking lot from a subway platform. And anyway, so he finds himself on this trail and finds this cemetery. And he thought he had visited all the cemeteries in the area. He's sort of obsessed with death. And so when he finds the cemetery, he starts walking through and he sees these tombs, but they're tombs that sort of feel like frozen life or frozen death, I guess, if you were, where there are mausoleums, but they have smoke coming out of the chimneys. There's a girl that's sort of frozen in a hospital gown, sort of on a bridge in between a tomb. And so I just started to think about these notions of moments of what if our mausoleums really looked like our ends, really looked like what they were. You could have kind of froze that moment in time. And I think it would say a lot more than the simple gravestone does itself, or some of the way that the tributes do, with marble angels and such. And also, of course, it feeds back to the notion of this protagonist being obsessed with death, and the whole idea of death being something that can be present, but it's generally thought of as the after or something after. So I was kind of fascinated to think about what that would mean if you were to actually put that together, go to a cemetery that showed it sort of present, even if it's in a frozen state. I hope that's explaining it well enough to make that visually clear.
Yeah, you guys, you have to read this because it is just, everything is so beautiful and you can really picture what's going on in your mind. You're a very visual storyteller, and it's just great. And I'm going to jump into another story real quick. I'm going to go back to the Coffin Maker's Book of Dark Tales. I'm going to get that right soon. I flub that one constantly, but I love the book. And I know that this is probably the one you get talked to a lot about, but the governess story. It's this beautiful story about these children who are terrors and trying to scare off a governess, and a new governess comes in. And I was wondering what inspired that one, because it gets really dark really fast, and it's awesome.
Well, thank you. Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. It was sort of sort of a, I guess you'd call it a loose personal account of her time as a governess in the 1840s for this really terrible family, and these children in this, it's a piece of fiction. So the children in the story just really abuse her, and you really get the sense that Anne's speaking firsthand on this from prior experience. And I was so furious with those children by the end of that book. I just had to make a story where they got their comeuppance, to use a British term, and that's where that came from. And that one was a lot of fun because I don't remember where the idea came from for Mrs. Peels herself, but she was a blast to write. She's sort of a creature feature. A lot of those coffin maker stories are kind of creature features, at least my end of it. I think Curtis's, a lot of them are a lot more eloquent than mine. Yeah, that one was a lot of fun to write. And going back to that period, that sort of, I guess in that story, it's more sort of a late Victorian rather than mid-Victorian. But it still feels 19th century in the telling, I think.
Yeah, I love I wrote a governess story once, but your governesses all have to be about that same era. Because we don't have a governess anymore. You have a nanny or an au pair or something, but
yeah, I suppose it's implied. That's a good point. Yeah.
But we were just forgive me. We were just talking before we came on about the dreams in the La Ferman house, and you said that was based on your experiences. So I thought that was really cool. So I wanted you to be able to tell our viewers about that one too.
Sure. Yeah, I did a internship in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, at a place called Black Point Estate and Gardens. And the director of that site, Dave DeSimone, he's a really good buddy of mine, been for years, back when I was a painter, gave me my first solo show. He's just been a really wonderful influence in so many ways on my art life. He's a great guy to just speak with on all sorts of levels, all sorts of things. Great traveler and such. So we had a lot of adventures while I was there doing my internship. And I was there essentially researching the textiles collection at Black Point. So a lot of Victorian clothing. And I was also doing a project on the year 1871 for a presentation at the Lake Geneva Public Library and such. For a little context, that estate was built in 1888, and it was for a beer baron named Conrad Sipe. So it's this big summer house on the lake. And during all our ramblings, my buddy Dave and I kind of came up with this character, Ezra Furman. We visited this mine, and we were down in this mine, and it was just sort of a riot. At one point, the guide was down there with a candle, and she blew out the candle, and we realized we're just in this mine by ourselves. We're not by ourselves, but with the other group. And and turn out the guide was like 16, and like she had been leading tours for like 2 weeks. And so we were just kind of hysterical, thinking, well, we're going to die. And, it was just a great adventure. And at that museum, there was some weird story about some guy that had like white chocolate and lead or something. And there was something about these kids dipping their fingers in the paint and eating the lead. And anyway, there was this whole little like mythology that came up around this character, Ezra Furman, that we just kind of made up. And so I kind of used him for the villain in this story. But more deeply, it's really about Ezra Furman in the story is this sort of mass murderer with his wife, a serial killer, and so this museum in that story is about him and preserving his clothing and his legacy and all that. And there's an intern and director, again loosely based on sort of my experiences with Dave in the story, and so the intern's doing this historic clothing research, but there's this haunted vest sort of thing that keeps appearing, that's showing up. And there's some research finds that this is there's blood on it, and that it's not from the Furman family. And not to give it all away, but things start to happen where you start to realize that there's something going on with some of the people that Furman killed. And then on a very, very broad notion, looking at who do we remember when we talk about these sorts of places, these sort of historic houses. What's this notion of celebration or commemoration? Should we be in some instances? Should we be telling a more rounded history about what some of these people have done, and how do we contextualize that again with the broader notion of in this case crime and that. So that story was fun on a lot of levels. It also involved my work as a historian, so I thought that was great. And it's a little different than some of the other stories in New Monsters, but I think Furman definitely fits in as a monster. I hope you found so too, Del.
Oh yeah, I love the whole thing with the history that I don't want to go way too off because I don't want to get anybody. I don't know how comfortable you are talking about it with the way people are these days, but my personal thing is that there are very bad people in history, and we need to recognize that and not necessarily, woohoo, yay, they lived, but hey, look, that guy lived, and people respected him and went out of their way to do things for him, and he was a monster. And we have to remember that we let people become the monster and still celebrate them, but we don't have to necessarily celebrate them today, but we have to remember that monsters can make it all the way up to the top of the society, and nobody did a damn thing about it and didn't look badly on them until we're in our present day and we're like, well, we don't need to talk about that person. It's like, yes, we need to talk about that person, because otherwise there's just going to be another one and another one and another one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and because they used to bring children out to executions to just show them also that, and yes, you can also destroy the monster. I think was mostly behind that. So
yeah, definitely. I think that, I mean, as an historian, you really start to understand that there really aren't heroes and villains in history, that you have people, and that history is extraordinarily complex. You have to put things in context with the era, but you have to tell the truth. It's the most important obligation you have. And in my view, you have to tell the best objective truth of what's going on to your ability. It's not always easy to tell those stories. Sometimes you don't have a lot of evidence. You do the best you can. But certainly, I mean, in the museum I work at, the work that I do deals with someone who dealt in the slave trade, made a lot of money off the slave trade. And so it's about telling the full story about, what he was involved in, as well as him being a big proponent of, the American Revolution and helping to win liberty as such. So, again, it's about telling the whole story and not really, in my view, not, pointing fingers and saying, this is a hero, this is a villain. A lot of times it's about people doing really bad things. But again, it's not about hiding any of that stuff. And so, yes, to your point, it needs to be done. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in that regard with, I think, a lot of histories. But I think that people are reckoning with that and working toward, telling a more complete story.
Yeah, quick side note on that. The one that really bothered me was I got taken on a fabulous haunted history tour by an exceptionally educated man named Andrew, and I'm gonna forget his last name, but anyway, it was down in New Orleans, and he took us to all the different places and explained the histories. And when he took us to Jackson Square, this was still when the statue was up, and he kind of got everybody's opinions on, what do you know about Andrew Jackson? And they were just like, oh, he Old Hickory, he did this and he did this. And then he's like, okay, and then what do you know about the Trail of Tears? And what do you know about the executions that were held here in this square? And like describing everything. And he was actually, he was born in like Poland and been in all these other places and was now living in New Orleans working on his dissertation. But it was having somebody who wasn't even from America originally suddenly giving us an education in our history and made everybody go like, oh, well, I didn't know about that. They don't really talk about that too much in high school, or if they do, they gloss it over so much that, that now that's something that's gone. So I mean, I get, people don't want to be like, oh, we're looking up to him, but it's just like, but still you have to remember him, because even though he was everybody's Old Hickory and did all these wonderful, fun things that we all remember, we have to remember the dark side too.
Absolutely.
And he was president. Yeah. So.
Yes, definitely. One of the things I talk about the museum I work at is the fact that, we always learn about slavery in the South, but it was pervasive all through the North and in New England, and particularly in Rhode Island. it really underpinned the economy, especially as it had to do with sugar, which is sort of the fuel for the triangle trade that's going to Africa, to the West Indies, and back up to Rhode Island, where the sugar is being used to make rum, rum being the major export going to Africa to trade for enslaved people. So, over 1,000 ships leave Rhode Island alone, transfer 100,000 enslaved people to the Americas. So you have aspects of that a lot of people will come into the museum and I had no idea that this was here. And so again, this is something that I think is becoming more well known, and broadening the notion of what it is. And one of the things we talk about is how everyone at the time, even if they weren't necessarily owning enslaved people or trading in them, they were still complicit because they're making maybe the sales for the ships, or they're farmers sending crops down to feed these people in the West Indies that are cutting the sugar cane. But we also then, I especially like to tie it to today, how we still support. There's still 50 million enslaved people in the world in different trades. Everything from literal chattel slavery to people in that are forced into sex slavery and such. And so there's a wide range of it. And but the clothing that we wear, a lot of that's produced by enslaved hands. We don't see it, but it's still going on in the country. So this notion of complicity is still with us too. And it's not easy to talk about. It's not easy to reckon with, but it's just important to keep in mind. And I think it also helps put into context that notion of reliability and what we need to do, what we're forced to do, because we don't really have any other options, right? We have very few options. Not all of us can afford to buy, American-made clothing because it's extraordinarily expensive. It can be $60 for a pair of shorts or something. So, again, not to go on a big history lesson, but just to provide some.
I love history.
Some of that. Yes, again, I think you're right on point with that. And Jackson is just another one of those figures that the whole story needs to be told.
Yeah, he's one of the very polarizing ones, I think, for America. New Orleans itself is just a bastion of history. I love going down there, but I need to get out to Portland and Providence. I keep getting those two.
Portland, Maine's beautiful too, actually. Get up to Portland too.
I have a friend who lives there, so I get everything all goofed up. I just want to go hit the East Coast and spend like a month kind of slowly going through state by state, because it's all very close together. So I could have a good time. And I think that as soon as you move into Providence, they automatically pull you aside, don't they? And train you up if you don't already have like 4 artistic capabilities. You have to learn that before you're allowed to live there. For everybody that I've talked to,
creative capital, it does tend to attract a lot of artists, and it's a wonderful place to be. I think Rhode Island, I've lived in Connecticut, I've lived in Mass. I grew up partly in Mass when I was younger. I think Rhode Island is the gem of New England by far that I've experienced. Massachusetts has its attractions, Connecticut too. Of course, New Hampshire, Vermont, the beauty in all of these places. But Rhode Island is, I think, the little secret, and Providence in particular. It's just, there's not a city like it. It's just remarkable.
I'm going to have to go visit that. My mother found some place, I'm not going to name it because I don't want to badmouth them, but down in Alabama, that she wants to have a little vacation house in the South. And then she was like, I'll just rent one. It's easier than trying to maintain a property when I'm not there. But she found this small town that was like, oh, it's an author's paradise. We have all these book signings and all these local authors live here and thrive. And they went to it. She took my niece and they were just like, there was nothing there. It was really run down in the places that were, and nothing was open. On the weekends they closed. Apparently they only do their signings and stuff during the week, which that doesn't make sense. And so we're just like, okay, so that one's out. So I'm like, okay, so we're going further north. And she's like, I don't want snow. I want art.
Well, weirdly, Providence doesn't really seem to have much snow. I don't know why. Of all the years I've lived here, I've seen only a handful of snowstorms. I don't. I think the ocean's part of it, the way it's kind of situated. But yeah, wow. Talk about bookstores here. There was one that really broke my heart this year. Cellar Stories that closed. It's called Cellar Stories, but it was upstairs. It had been there for over 40 years, and it was just a magical place. I used to go there and get all my early Anne Rice first editions of the Vampire Chronicles when I was like 19. But it was just a great store, and they had I held a Lovecraft book there, one that was in his that he actually owned and had written his name in. They had a few for sale there. I think, well, actually, I think they only had two anyway. They had one that had just come in, and the woman was showing it to me behind the counter, and I said, "May I hold that?" She said, "Sure." So she handed it to me, and I was just like, "Wow!" I was holding this book that Lovecraft held, which was amazing, because all his papers are at the John Hay Library by Brown, and all you can look at are facsimiles now because I guess they're getting so frayed from all the use. But that was amazing, and that's something that you feel like can only happen in Providence. And I mean, there's even a Lovecraft Arts and Science, a whole bookstore for dark fiction, right in the center of the city. And you walk in there, and it's just a who's who of writing contemporary stuff, and also, of course, many, many, many successful authors, and even back to Poe and such. So, yeah, Providence is just loaded with great people, great bookstores. You got to get up here.
Yeah, we used to have this great bookstore over in Omaha that it's just called the Antiquarium, and in the basement there was a record store. On the main two floors there were books that went all the way to the back, and then there was an upper story that had an art gallery in it. So you kind of go up to the second floor, and then there was another little section up above, and he'd have like once a month new art displays on. But he kept a bunch of chairs in a circle when you entered the store, and he'd be sitting there barefoot, smoking a cigarette, doing his crossword puzzle, had a coffee pot going all the time, and people just join around Tom Rudloff and chat. And he spoke like 10 different languages. So whenever anybody who came in to town that spoke a different language he'd be introduced to them. They'd be like, "Oh, if you want to practice," because he wanted to practice maintaining languages, then he would help them get their English down. So it wasn't unusual to have a conversation going around with like 3 or 4 different languages being spoken, which was really fun.
Yeah.
It was fabulous. And they ended up, health and stuff eventually caught up with him, and he had to close down the bookstore part and went to one that's a little bit smaller there's a smaller city here where we have a bunch of it seems like everybody who has a good bookstore has a smaller sister site there. And so he went to the smaller bookstore and then ended up passing away. And it was just like, oh my God. So, but those bookstores, you walk in and time just stops. You can just, the power of all the words going on just somehow makes time dilate down until you can just kind of, it's
a great observation. There's a library here called the Providence Athenaeum that was built in the 1830s. And Poe actually used to court Sarah Helen Whitman there. He was a poet that lived down the road, and there was big dramas this was after Virginia died, so big drama about his wife, Virginia, I should say. And big drama about him courting her and drunkenness, and the famous portrait of him, the Ultima Thule, where he looks really drawn and hangdog, and he's got the black circles under his eyes. That was actually taken on the site of another library called the Rhode Island School Design Fleet Library, where I do a lot of work. I was doing some research and found out that the building used to literally be on that site. So that was weird to think about, that that he had tried to kill himself and took some laudanum, went to Boston, and he ended up coming back. He threw up the laudanum, came back, and then 4 days later, they took this picture of him, and he said it was probably the lowest point of his life. So anyway, all this was going on at that time, and a lot of this was happening at that Providence Athenaeum at this library. And they have a book where he wrote his name in it under a poem that had been printed as anonymous, and I think it was a Godey's. I may be wrong on that, but I think that's what it was. But anyway, it's just creaking floors of books, and it's just like what you said. You feel the words surround you, and then you have all these classical busts, of course, looking at you, one of them being Poe right at the entrance. And then there's a raven and a bell jar and all this stuff. So, yeah, it's an incredible library. But yeah, I definitely feel that notion of what you mentioned there.
Yeah, I have a friend who works at the Edgar Allan Poe House off and on. She volunteers there. And she sent me a print of that picture. She had redrawn it or whatever. But yeah, I gave it to my daughter for her graduation present because she was a big Poe fan.
Oh, that's great. The one in Virginia, is it the Poe Museum of Virginia?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, I actually did an interview on my podcast with the director, the curator there, Chris Sempner, and he was a wonderful guy to talk to. They have such a great Poe collection. It's amazing.
What does your podcast cover? I that's one thing I didn't get into.
Oh, well, I talk to artists, authors, musicians, historians, so pretty broad range of artists, and of course the historians. I got to talk to them too. But generally that. And if I read a book by a contemporary author, I'll reach out to him or her and see if I can get them on the podcast. I just really enjoy that sort of thing when a book really strikes you, and then you can talk, one on one with somebody. It's a real thrill.
Oh yeah, I love picking the brains. Doing a little bit of that right now. That's why I have my crows sweeping down on the thing. It's like I'm going after your head. I'm going to go through the eye if I have to.
Okay.
I will get it. I'm not going to even try to find my handwriting right now. But when you're talking about holding the book that Lovecraft wrote, I think it was in the Coffin Maker's book. Wasn't that a story that you had written about the guy who finds the notebook, the Black Book of Nothings?
Oh, that was Curtis.
Oh, is that Curtis? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's a great story.
Just reminded me of a similar idea, being like, I get to touch the book that this person had.
Yeah.
Good story, Curtis, by the way.
Oh yeah, that's a fabulous story. And the feeling would I think the feeling would be sort of like what that protag felt, sure.
When you get to hug history, and that's what if I get something like that, I just have to like give it a nice hug, and then I bubble wrap it all up nice, and maybe give it a sniff or two before I do that. But that's just my thing. And then I put them all away so that they stay safe and happy.
Mm-hmm.
I can't get too many going back. I did once at that bookstore I was telling you about get a first edition copy of Naked Lunch, which was just odd because I'd been talking about it with a friend, and I noticed it in the cabinet. I didn't even realize that he had it there, not just for display purposes, but because it was a first edition. Mm-hmm. And this is before I was smart about books, besides, about collectibles anyway. And so I got it, and I was like talking to my friend. He's like, this is a first edition. And I'm like, okay, I spent $20 on it. He's like, you what? Yeah.
That's amazing. I ordered a book by it's called Are You Loathsome Tonight by Poppy Z. Bright. And this is one of those, I just got into Poppy Z. Bright, so I just of course was ordering everything because Billy Martin now is just amazing. But I remember it came in the mail, and it was signed by Poppy and Caitlin Kiernan and Peter Straub and the artist. It was this limited edition run. And it was just sort of one of those moments like that where you're going, oh my gosh, this is much more amazing than I expected it to be. I had no idea that this is what would come.
Yeah, one of these days, well, hopefully not anytime soon, but when I pass on down, my nephew is fighting for, we're already talking about when I die, because I have like all my bookcases are full with here's a row of books, and then here's a row of books in front of them, and then here are the books on top of them stacked, and then here's the stacks over here, and the boxes stuck away in the closet. And so he's claiming first dibs on everything I have that's signed and that's cool, I guess. So you're going to end up with my nephew eventually, by the way. So,
Fantastic.
Because you're part of the cool work. It'll be when I'm dead, but
Sure, it'll be in good hands. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I started him off well. It was like little kid who's reading. I was that little kid who, I didn't need any friends in elementary school because I had my books. Mm-hmm. I was just always reading, and he was that way as well. And so it was like, okay, as soon as you're old enough to get into chapter books, here's some Ray Bradbury. All right, we got you started right. Eventually, we'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get to the Lovecraft and stuff, but you don't want to start that too young, Mm-hmm. But yeah, but he's turned out to be really, really, really artistic and everything. Yeah. So and he's also a musician. And speaking of that, you do your music. If you guys, by the way, want to know, I have all of his links basically in one. It'll be above or below wherever you're at. in the description to your website, and that has links to your artwork, your music, and everywhere your stuff can be found, books and everything. But your music is really awesome. It's very, very dark, for one thing, and I love just the feel, because it's not like songs. It's just, it's got its own. It's very experimental. But do you record every part yourself?
Yeah, and the album specifically, well, I have a couple of things I think on my website. I have a project that's from 2010 that was called Trans Atlas. It was a two-piece band with a buddy of mine, Ben Fox, who's a phenomenal drummer. That's really the best reason to listen to those songs, is the drums are just incredible in that. But the record that I have on there that's on Bandcamp that I'm sort of featuring right now on my site is called Decomposer. And those songs, I think I wrote them all between the ages of 24 and 26. So it's been, yeah, I mean, I'm 43, so it's been, they've been around a long time. And I had them in different iterations of albums and different forms and such for a while. And I was kind of, self-releasing stuff and selling things at shows. I did music primarily from the age of about, like, I don't know, 14 to 20, 25, 26. And then I started painting seriously. So, those songs are, again, they're older, but what I did is last year I was thinking about them because I always liked them. And I wanted to see about, now that I had, like, modern editing capabilities, that, things that basically just right on my laptop where I could easily do all this stuff and make it really hi-fi where I couldn't before. Back when I was doing this, it was a lot of 4-track tapes and, things just didn't sound really great. So I was able to go back and I started listening to them, and I thought, I like a lot of this, but I want to sort of bring it up to how I feel now, or artistically what I feel like reflects my mood or stylings now. So I chopped up a lot of it, and I threw a lot of things in reverse, and I slowed things down, and I took old samples of things and twisted them all around, and then I ended up with that album. And it's really bizarre, but I really do like it. I think it came out how I wanted it to, and I feel good about the songs. I've always been a little self-conscious of my voice because I don't think I really have a very good voice. But I think, all in all, I think the recordings came out pretty well. And Decomposer, the title sort of worked on a couple levels. I thought about, when I did this record, that I thought, okay, well, maybe I can be a, quote, horror musician or something. And what does that actually mean? And then, so the whole idea of decomposing was, of course, great. But then the idea of breaking down these songs, these old songs, and making them into something new was kind of fascinating too, in that realm. And the cover of it was an interesting story too, because it's this weird red moth thing, and or mothy looking creature. And just a quick little aside, my brother Jordan took me to Mothman country in West Virginia before I moved out to Providence. And we went out to I don't know if anybody's familiar with this. Mothman is this supposed creature that was, I don't know if you call it haunting or whatever, this town in West Virginia. And there's this whole idea that it's maybe comes from this government experiment, or it's, comes out of this field where there are these chemicals that have been dumped in this area called TNT, which is strange. It was a military armament storage or something. And anyway, so we went to Mothman country, went to the museum, and then he took me out to TNT, which is this area where I think the first people saw this Mothman thing flying over them, over their car, and they're trying to get away from it. And there were all these, like, weird bunkers where they were storing these guns and things and ammunition. And so we went in one of them, and the whole area is really strange. It's very overgrown. The water, there's this weird sort of still, stagnant river area, and it's just totally still. And apparently there's still all kinds of chemicals and stuff out there, even though it's like this park area, I guess. But anyway, we went in one of these bunker things, and it sounds like you're in a nightmare. Like, you go in and your voice echoes. It's this cylindrical chamber, and it's really dark except for this hole in the top where light comes through. And so it's this intensely echoing thing, and it just feels like this must be like what hell's like, what sound in hell is like, because you can't, like, your footsteps echo and it shuffles your words and everything. It's like sound all fighting with each other. There it is. And so
Yeah.
as we're walking around, we see this really, really spooky, bizarre figure that someone had spray painted, and that thing is life size. And it was a lot darker than that when we saw it, and it was just kind of on this wall, and it sort of spooked us. And then so I took this picture of it with flash, and then I didn't really do much editing to that. That's just kind of how it sort of came out. So I apologize if there's any copy infringement on the artist who did that. I'm guessing it's been there probably since the 70s.
I think it was.
Yeah, if you're out there, I'm happy to credit you on the album. But anyway, that's where that came from, and that was I just thought that was a perfect cover for that.
That is very cool. And we're going in when you're talking about your paintings. I just grabbed one of your paintings because it reminded me of the story we were talking about before with the graves. And I was wondering, was this inspired by that? Was that part of, or is it just something else you're doing?
This was a series called Urban Monoliths, and it was a cemetery in the center of Cleveland, right by what's the baseball field, Progressive Field, or whatever it's called now, where the Guardians play, formerly the Indians. And the name of the cemetery is slipping my mind, and I can't believe it. But anyway, it's a cemetery in the center of the city, and it's where the earliest inhabitants of Cleveland are buried, as far as the earliest European inhabitants. And there are all these stones, a lot of them like this in this state. And I was just thinking, I was walking through there one day and just thinking, sort of just how sad it is that these are sort of kind of kicked over like that and kind of look like broken bodies that have just stumbled over or whatever. And so that's where I got the idea for Urban Monolith. So I did a series of 12 of these paintings in black and white. Some of them are a little washier than that one. I did some that were sort of more Rothko-y looking, and then some that were really clean like that and just sort of austere. And then a colleague of mine, a brilliant photographer, his name's Greg Ruffing, he did a series alongside where he essentially took these pictures of different areas in Cleveland where he was from and around the area. And then he developed the prints, and we went and buried them in these different areas where he had taken the pictures. And then later on, we went like 2 weeks later and we dug them up. And then they were in all sorts of different states of decay and that. And so then we took them and presented them as they were, just cleaned them off to the best we could. But it was a really interesting show. It was dark. It was very death heavy and, this notion of decay. But I thought that it really paralleled well. But anyway, that's sort of a long-winded version of explanation of that piece.
That's fine. We like talking. No, I'm just fascinated. You're very good at everything that you do, and it just amazes me. I don't know. I love talking to people who are multi-talented and who have a vocabulary and things. That's something else I've noticed. You're another one of the ones with the $10 words that pop in there every now and then. I think I did have to look up 2 words when I was reading your book. I pride myself on my vocabulary, but I was like, I have no idea.
Well, thank you. I think I know a lot of people. Well, I know there's this sort of debate with writing simply or writing. You should always use the $5 word or the 50-cent word instead of the whatever word. I'm not a proponent of that. I don't believe in using language to try to showboat or, fancy things up or put, a fancy dress on a word or on a story or whatever. But I think that going back to what you were saying in the beginning about musicality in writing, I think that utilizing these words, utilizing these language, this kind of language can really amp things up and make things more fluid and make things sound more eloquent, and can also make them more impactful. And sometimes it's literally the meaning of the word that's needed. That's a necessity, I find. I find that maybe some of these, quote, expensive words, they tell the story better and they sound better. And I like reading things out loud when I'm writing. I'm always reading them out loud to hear how they sound. And I like to write things that I want to read. And I don't like to necessarily read in short clipped things. That can be effective. And I've done that sort of thing in the past. If the story calls for it, sure. But I find that at least, my ethos or my personal styling or I don't know, my just general feeling, my gut feeling on it is that, I really like to use the words because I think they're beautiful words. And especially when they have specific meanings tied to them, like I'm saying, I think you should insert them. And also, again, the musicality of it, the way it flows, the way it can make the other words sound, the way it can affect and color and sort of flood in to the sentence itself can be really effective. If you do it, several words over and over and over and over, you're bludgeoning someone, and I think you get incoherent. But if you use them correctly, and maybe sparingly, maybe not, but generally, if you're using them kind of sparingly, I think it can really add to the beauty and fluidity of the piece itself.
Oh, very much. There's a project, and I might get in touch with you if you don't mind, that I'm working on that we're going to be doing a showcase on at some point in the future. Right before Leonard Cohen died, in the last interview that he did, he brought up what he called the landscape of language, because people were asking him, well, you're not a religious man, but you wrote Hallelujah, you want it darker, you have all of these religious themes, going in the Stranger song, and he's just some Joseph looking for a manger, and where does this come from? And he was like, well, it was how I was raised, in the language that I was presented, and it's affects how you think and how you speak and how you fill everything in. And as you grow up, you have the choice of, am I going to expand my vocabulary? What am I interested in? And your vocabulary goes around that. If you become a nurse, you're going to be speaking a lot of weird Latin and driving your kids nuts and stuff. But but the way it goes into your work as you progress, you can see, it's not like I'm using this word because I want to talk down to you. It's because this is the word that it is. I'm not going to give you 20 words explaining it when I can give you one. And so
very, very good point there. Sometimes that one larger word can really say a lot. Yeah, absolutely. That's another great point. There was another point going off what you were saying there. About speaking of Cohen and religion and that. Probably the greatest influence me as maybe as an artist is Emily Dickinson, and her work has that, what they call the hymn meter, because she was, even though she sort of rebelled against a specific religious following, she didn't really adhere to any specific church. She was certainly Christian as far as she read the Bible and understood it thoroughly and loved the Book of Revelations, etc. And you can see there's influence of the Bible in her work, but you can definitely see that meter. Sometimes her work reads as what you think of as like maybe free verse, but when you start counting it, you see that she's actually using these methods, and sort of, again, getting back to that notion of like, if you're singing a song, she's sort of ascribing to that. The influence of, right, I think early on, whatever you're doing can certainly permeate that. I mentioned Anne Rice earlier. Her the florid use of language definitely influenced me, and I think it's also interesting that she didn't have an editor. I think she did for Interview with the Vampire, and they sort of changed the notion of where that was going, and it sounds like rightly so. But she never had an editor later on, and there are areas where you could tell where it could use it, but I also thought there's a striking originality to her work that it's important. And I think that increasingly that's what I'm grappling with. I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to have the bravery to just really strike off my own and not necessarily listen to all the rules that we're told. Even the what's considered maybe, I guess, axiomatic notions, like even the Strunk and White and even Stephen King on writing. I think my whole generation has sort of read both of those books. And don't get me wrong, I am not saying that there isn't tons of valuable stuff in those, and I've learned tons of valuable stuff in them. But I think adhering strictly to any doctrine when it comes to that is really dangerous. And I notice things about sometimes when I'll read other or contemporary authors' work, it seems like everybody's kind of doing a similar thing in a lot of regards. And I think a lot of people have read On Writing by Stephen King, and they sort of follow these things. People are really afraid to use passive construction at all. And so you sort of get these strange clipped sentences and things. Whereas, I don't know, again, I feel like even if it maybe is seeming like it's too passive, or it's seeming like it's not like a modern idiom, I'd rather just do it how I feel like is best for however I need to express it, and go from there. And maybe it doesn't work, but at least I feel like I'm trying my best to say it the way I want to say it, in the most original way.
Oh yeah, I was finishing up some stuff today for a submission, and because I wait to the last minute for everything. I've been doing. I accidentally ended up on a couple of shows that I wasn't planning on. Like, okay, and tonight I'm gonna. Oh, I guess I have 2 minutes to change a shirt so I represent that show and hop online. Okay, I'm gonna do that then. But when you go back through and trying to edit things, and I was doing my best to try to stay in my voice, but when I get overwhelmed, I end up writing all this stuff I don't need to, and then I have to go back and be like, okay, remember who you are, consolidate it all down, because you don't actually speak like that, and then go ahead and go on. Because I use some of those more expensive words too, not often, but enough when I get through, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To make it, I don't know. A lot of times, even when I'm trying to write modern stuff, I just have a slightly gothic voice, and it's because of how much I've read of gothic authors.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully I don't come off as Henry James, because no offense, but that man could describe a cup in like 500 pages. And but yeah, that ends up being my voice a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So it's strange when you have like the older voice in a different setting than it should be. But it's
Mm-hmm.
what you work with. It's what you know.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think whatever it's going to be is going to resolve itself. Again, I think you just have to have the bravery to be willing to chew on it all, and not be afraid, not only anybody quash that notion that paragraphs can be whole pages. That's fine. That's okay. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's okay technically that you can do that. You don't have to have paragraphs of 1 or 2 lines, and everything has to be quick. It all just depends on what the story again dictates, I think. And I also think that when we're talking about this kind of language, whether it's florid, fancy, whatever, whether it's $10 words or whether it's short declarative statements, whatever has the most power, I think, is the most important thing, because I think that's what everyone's going for when they're trying to tell a story, is what is the most powerful way to say it. And if a short declarative way is the way to say it, especially for that mood or that tone, do it. A lot of times I find the mix is really effective, because that way you're not drowning anybody in anything. And that can be tough to do. And again, that's in some ways, I think, kind of what I'm trying to go for in some of, especially my newer work, but it's not necessarily easy, but I think it's really interesting. It can offer some variation. And one of the things I've been playing with also in my work is I've been really influenced actually by Brian Evanson lately, especially his story length. A lot of times I'd sit down and do a short piece, and it would end up somewhere in the maybe 5,000 word range, that roughly 15, 25, maybe it would even balloon to 30. But reading his work over the last year or so, and seeing how he's able to crunch down his ideas and his narrative into 10 pages or 13 pages and have it be extraordinarily powerful and strange and just wondrous, and all this in this tight little compact piece, has been really influential to me. I've been working on a batch of Victorian stories, which I just finished. They all take place between 1837 and 1901. And I decided that I wanted to try to write them all within that sort of tight word count. And some of them go a little bit longer. Some of them are a little shorter, though. But I wanted to try that. And it was kind of interesting because, of course, the Victorian idiom is sort of more balloony and a little more decorative. But to try to crunch down these big ideas in that Victorian language was really a challenge, but I found it really fun too. And I love that notion of being able to read something in a whole sitting. Like it goes back to Poe's principle on, storycraft, where if you can read something in about 20 minutes, you have the reader really within your grasp, really, right there with you. Whereas you can't do that with a novel or something like that. So Poe was able to take something like the Mask of the Red Death or the Telltale Heart and really just power punch you with that in that short experience. And I don't know, I find that to be increasingly more what I'm interested in doing. Thinking of being able to just have somebody for a few minutes and give them that, like, Stephen King said, that kiss in the dark, the short story.
Nice. Is this going to be released as a collection?
Yeah, at some point. It's untitled, but yeah, it's finished. But it's sort of weird. I mean, I'm just going to be interested to see what people think about the stories. But being a primarily 19th century America focus as an historian, I just really dove into a lot of my interest in that area of time. Daguerreotypes and the Oregon Trail and all sorts of things like that.
I love that word, daguerreotypes.
Yeah.
It's not used often. It's actually Anne Rice is who I learned that from.
Ah.
It was, I can't remember the name of what it was. It was the story with the guy who ended up becoming a photographer, and there was like a crazy woman walking around that taught him things. Do you remember what
it'll come to me.
But yeah, I think you know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, I believe I do. Yeah.
It dealt a lot with the different levels of races in New Orleans at the time, and if you were freed or...
Is it the Witching Hour?
No, it wasn't with the slave. Well, it wasn't the Mayfair. It was a standalone, but I don't think it was so much supernatural as it was just kind of a look at the class structure. And it was somebody who was like a freed slave or was the child of a freed slave who just took up photography. And Jesse, hello.
I'm not sure, and I'm just wondering if I've read this, and if I haven't, it sounds fascinating.
I'll find it. It's over there. It's right there, but I can't get it right now. While we have everybody up here, does anybody have any questions for Josh? We've got the history, we've got the awesome writing, we've got the awesome music and painting. He's from Ohio, by the way, to begin with, and now he is living in lovely Providence, Rhode Island, where I want to be when I grow up, if I grow up.
Speaking of place, I have a question for you, Del. Is there a building called Woodman in Omaha?
Yes, there's the Woodman Building.
The Woodman Building, okay. One of my all-time favorite movies, my girlfriend and I both, is About Schmidt, filmed in Omaha. And I saw that building, and I thought it was Omaha. And so I had to say, next time I talk to somebody from Nebraska, I got to ask them because it's a fantastic movie. And I don't know. I always want to visit Omaha just because of that.
I can't remember if it's still standing or not. I think it is. So when I lived in Omaha, it was there, and it was like a big thing that you notice. But now I don't really go to Omaha. We go through Omaha, like to get to the airport or to cross over to Council Bluffs where we can gamble. My mother and I like to go there. And hey, Joshua, I was late to the show. I may have already answered. Who inspired you to put you on the path you're on?
Oh, great question. It's really odd when I think about just doing art in general. I don't really know. I mean, it's one of those things where I just have done it, and I don't know if it feels like it was just sort of what I was supposed to do. I guess in the way some people are born knowing they're going to go in this direction, that direction. Whatever it was, I was always just making some kind of book or some kind of drawing. And it always just felt like my work, whatever the creative thing, whatever the fascination was. I used to blend all kinds of stuff together. So for instance, when I was in third or fourth grade, I got obsessed with the Titanic. And so I started making these Titanic books. And I was drawing the Titanic like obsessively, sort of like in the Royal Tenenbaums, where I think it's Richie is drawing Margot like over and over 50 times, like her reading a book. It's like that was me with the Titanic. And I had billions of these. And so I made this book about the sinking of the Titanic, and I took it to the local library, and it sort of melded, my historic interest, my interest in writing, and then drawing, and all in this, one little art piece, and took it up, and they put it on display. Like right there at the center of their book thing in the public library. And I remember that was such a bolstering thing. And I'm still really grateful to them, because it's almost like something that made me realize that this sort of thing was possible. And I think that really did have an influence on me, that moment of them saying, oh yeah, absolutely. And they didn't even like kind of smirk at me like I was a little kid. They looked at it and they said, yeah, I think we can put this up. Like it was well enough done. It was acceptable enough. So I think that's just, again, I know it's not a really great answer, but it really just feels like that's what I'm supposed to be doing, and I've just sort of followed that. It's made my working life a little strange. I haven't always been an historian as far as by profession. I got a culinary degree here at Johnson & Wales in Providence 20 years ago, so I did a lot of work. I worked as a manager and a server at a Thai restaurant for 8 years. I was a luthier, string instruments, so I worked, making double basses and violins and cellos and setting them up. And I was mainly the bow guy there, so I did a lot of bow rehair, a lot of bow lutherie work. Did that for 4 years, and so just recently I went back and got my master's, and so now I've been in the museum field. But I think that as far as creative work goes, I don't know. I guess it just is a path that, again, I don't know if it's going to, make me any money in the long run, but it feels like whatever I'm doing, whatever I need to say is the way that, this is the way I'm saying it. And they just go from there, just keep making it, even if it doesn't mean that it's going to, necessarily get you anything. I don't think that's really what it's about anyway. You know what I mean? I don't know why anyone does the things that they do creatively, really. I think there's an impetus for it. And, as long as you're fulfilling that, I think you're on the right path and doing the right thing. I don't know if any of that made sense at all, but
yes.
Good question. Oh, one last thing I'll add, as far as maybe who put me on the path that I'm on. I think my mom had a big deal to do with that. My mom is just sort of wonderfully morbid. I remember when I was a really little kid, she would say things like, don't you ever want to just like dig people up, like dig dead people up and like open their coffins and look at them, like see what they look like now? And I thought, yeah, I kind of do. Yeah, I think that sounds kind of interesting. And I was always really into archaeology as a kid, but she would say stuff to me like that. You're weirder than I am, And her mother used to take her walking around where I was born, Sandusky, Ohio. There's a cholera cemetery. And right now it's just sort of a marker on this. It was a mass grave, basically, because they had a terrible epidemic there, as like a lot of places in the 1840s when that really hit the U.S. And so her mom used to take her around to this cholera cemetery. So I'm saying maybe it's just like generations deep. I don't know. Maybe that's where this is coming from. But
this is no great answer. Some little things don't pass them by. Let's see. Sandusky. And
Sandusky.
Jenny, let's find out more about the story of the tombstone picture in reading later. Yes, we'll definitely be reading it.
Oh, and another, I guess while I'm rambling on about childhood, I brought some books over here to sit next to me in case you were asking me what I was reading today. Anyway, okay. I'm just going to hold this one book up. I talk about it quite a bit when I talk about things. I don't know if anybody can see this. The lighting's terrible. I'm sorry. Here we go. Wait Till Helen Comes. Yeah. It's a book by Mary Downing Hong for fourth, fifth graders, whatever. I read this in fourth grade, and this changed my life. And I still read it every single year. I have since I found it again, sort of rediscovered it in 2006, and I've read it every year since then. It's I mean, really a young adult. It's a kid's book. But it's an incredibly powerful piece of fiction, I think. And her description of the protagonist realizing that she's going to die and what her body is going to be after she dies, and the whole notion that, like, basically how she says it is that there are bones under her skin. She really realizes it for the first time, and that they're always going to be there, even when she can't feel them. And I think that was a hugely instrumental thing in me writing dark fiction. That whole notion of that was so fascinating and dark and strange and really a deep, dark thing for kids. That, coupled with Stephen Gammell's drawings and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, are probably huge influences on why I'm doing the things I'm doing today.
So you brought over what you're reading. Do you happen to have any of your own stuff here? Would you like to read a little bit of something tonight? I'm going to do a commercial break real quick, and
sure.
If you happen to have something, I'll give you that little bit of time to prepare.
Sure. How much time are you thinking?
However much you'd like to do. So what are we going to get here?
I'm going to read a really short piece, the shortest piece from New Monsters. It's called This, the Body. This had been the body, the one he lived in, the one that he now longed for, the perfect vessel in which he might have passed a consummate life had he not been felled early, barely 40, and with so much left unrealized. He stood beside it in the morgue, this body, surrounded by mother, brother, ex-wife, young daughter. He was an observer of their abject grief. He knew he should have felt it too, as much for them as for himself, but he was detached from them as well as his physical self. Knowing that there was, in fact, a beyond, whatever that was, had relieved the great fear of unknowing. He supposed that a considerable part of their grief was dealing with their unknown, their own unknowing. For his part, he felt only a lugubrious inanition, seeing himself as a corpse. It was larger than emotion, more harrowing than a greatest fear, more horrifying than live burial. He had tried to rejoin with his former flesh. Of course he had. Oil and water, even when combined, will separate. His attempt yielded a similar result, a surface penetration without adherence, with only temporary emulsification. For many hours, he remained beside his former self, observing the stages of decomposition with indignant awe. Then they pumped fluid into him and applied makeup and dressed him in a suit purchased to rot. He looked to himself like a powdered statue, decidedly unlifelike. But those who came to view him stuffed into his metal casket said he looked good and praised the good work that the funeral home had performed, considering the circumstances. Once in the grave, though, the facade collapsed like paper props in the rain. In its permeable capsule, the body blackened and festered, seeped and oozed and seethed until he no longer resembled what he had been, and, vigil concluded, he rose from the blackened mool and entered the period of wonder. There were others on this road, on all roads, to be sure. They crowded places which in life had appeared blank, empty, fields and ice floes and the like. They stood on seas and hovered like undulating heat waves above the sun-baked sands. He saw them in houses and cars, in basements, abandoned department stores, upon the pylons of bridges. They watched each other, and more importantly, they watched the living and waited. Sometimes he recognized them in the bodies of the living, saw in the flesh eyes shadows newly seated. Though they did not see him, they nonetheless seemed to sense him. And when he came near, they fled from him in their new forms to where there was light and others of flesh. How had they done it? He pondered this through the years, formless spans of night/day, where the world changed but no longer changed him. He carried his experiences with him like a forgotten language, and after an age, he found that his thoughts were beginning to thin and decay like bit rot. So he searched until he came upon a usurpation by one of his own kind, and witnessing how it was done, began to search for his new form. The infant lay still in liminal dream, quiescent and open to intrusion. He found its nascent soul floating on drafts of neural ether, and he suggested more dreams. An orange balloon set against the blue sky baked clean of vapor. The child, captivated by the complementary colors and the balloon's height, the temptation of seeing the grand map of it all, the life that lay before it, took the offered string and commenced the ride, releasing it as it rose, its tenuous hold on its young flesh, and laughing until at length the inchoate soul vanished. Then he, with the last of his dissolving will, lay his fragmented consciousness upon the vacated flesh, and after a fizzing, flashing scintillation which smelled something like gunpowder, settled into the untenanted shell, which had missed not a breath and only a beat of its rapid heart. The eyes opened, the flesh held, but within it, so he had vanished, like that child into the ozone. And so the crime, acted out with impunity, had been, as was manifestly necessary, equitable.
Bravo, sir. Thank you for that. That was one of my favorites. Because I sang before, for some of you that are joined us a bit late. A lot of his work deals with death, and that gives us 3 of them, kind of in different stages of, or at least that's how I kind of interpreted it. But,
Thank you.
Yeah, and you are very good at reading your own work too. There's some people who stumble. But
thank you. Well, I stumbled a little bit. I haven't read that one yet out loud, but I always try to read slowly because otherwise I really trip up.
Well, we're proud to have it on our show.
Honored to read it here.
So, okay, so you have the Victorian stuff that you haven't gotten a title for that's coming out, but right now we're releasing the new monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And I've already mentioned the Black Book. No, it's not that. I'm like, the black one. Yeah, no. The Gravedigger's Book of Coffin Maker's Book of Dark Tales, which I will never get right. Immortal and The Descent. The Descent is something else I haven't picked up yet, but I'm gonna beg you to autograph a copy of it for me, and I'll send you the monies for it if you can hook me up with that, because guys, you got to get into this while the getting's good. And I'm gonna be doing some giveaways tonight, and I'm eliminating everybody who works for the network because you guys don't get a join, but from the big prize anyway. And that gives us Jenny, our folks over at East Coast Haunters, and Mr. Mike Phelps. Rather than taking the time to spin a wheel, I'm just going to send all 3 of them the autographed paperback copy of New Monsters. Let me get that set up. And guys who are on the network, don't feel bad. I'll give you something to read while you're hiding out in Pick Twitch. You'll get the e-copies. So gonna get that going for everybody. Um, Mr. Phelps, I believe I need to have you send me something, or else I will send you an email so I can get a hold of what your address is. Jenny and Haunters, I think I have yours on saved already. But yeah, so is there anything else? Yeah, you're gonna love it. It's fabulous, I'm telling you. Is there anything else you wanted to promote or work on tonight?
Well,
Okay.
New Monsters is shipping now. The signed copies are only 100 of them. I'm not sure how many are left, but it is shipping now. As far as other work, I have The Inamorta, which we talked a little bit about. That is published by Weird House Press. There are some hardcover deluxe editions with these end papers that I did. This is actually an original art piece I did of music that I wrote that St. Joshi transcribed for me. And this was just a lot of fun, this project to do. And so there are a few copies of this left, the hardcover. There are some paperbacks too. And of course, the Coffin Maker's Book of Dark Tales, which you mentioned, that's a signed copy and paperback. Wrote this with the inimitable Curtis Lawson, my good buddy and brilliantly gifted author. And then this is the cover of The Descent, of the Weird House book that sounds like it's going to be shipping to you fine folks watching. This is a collection of stories. I kind of like to think of these a little more Twilight Zone-y, I think. They're kind of a range of stories. These are some of my personal favorites are in here. And then I have a couple of self-published books. I have a collection called What's Coming For You. That is a collection of short stories. This was my very first book. This is available through Amazon. And then I have a novel called A Mighty Word. I'm so sorry the lighting is so bad where I'm sitting and you can't see these things very well. There it is. A Mighty Word. This one, the cover is sort of, I guess, strange, you'd say, maybe for a novel that is, quote, horror or something of that sort. I don't know if I'd even call this a horror novel, although it does have what I'd like to call the civilized undead. So I guess technically they're zombies, but they're returned from the mid-Victorian period, and they just returned, I guess, with their civility, and they aren't mindless sort of wandering zombies looking for brains or anything. They want to know why the world they left is such a disaster, and it has to do kind of with that. And those are my books. So I suppose as far as promotion, that's everything beyond Decomposer. If anybody's interested in going over and listening to that on Bandcamp and buying a digital copy.
Yeah, it's awesome too. And if you go to the link, you can get to all of the stuff that you just posted up. I did see the interview with your brother where you were showing the first or the last two books that you held up. But with and then the Inamorta, that the story behind how you got that score work was really neat. If you don't mind sharing the full story with it.
Oh, sure.
Because
Well,
that
the
was just really
Inamorta.
cool.
Oh yeah, it was an incredible process to be involved in. The novel, just to give you a little background, the novella is about a violist, the world's greatest violist. Which, as a luthier of string instruments, that's always kind of a joke that the violist is always kind of like, not to play on words, but second fiddle or whatever. I personally think the viola is far more beautiful, and I love the sound of it, and I think it's a lot more expressive. It's closer to the human voice. Anyway, the protagonist in that is the world's greatest viola. It takes place in 1799, so it's a period piece. And he plays on this instrument called the Inamorta, which is this black, very large instrument. It's been passed down through his family, which are all virtuosos who have all met untimely ends, violent ends, for reasons sort of unknown, although the protagonist knows why this is the case. And he ends up at this castle called Teethsgate, where there's this very strange family kind of living on their own, Count and Countess and their wife, their daughter Deva, who's very strange and quickly sort of falls in love with him, and also sort of the power that he possesses in his playing, which is which is where the crux of the story really starts to happen. Anyway, the viola piece, the music for this, being that I write music, I'll have music for things in my head sometimes. I listen to a lot of classical music, and I've always wished I could have been a composer, or that my parents had given me piano lessons. I'm probably the only kid that wished that, but I didn't. I don't know how to play things, even though I worked on string instruments just enough to sort of tonality, make the sound. So I wrote this music in my head as I was, excuse me, walking around Providence, and came up with basically the theme for this main character and what this viola would be. And so it was kind of locked in my head. I tried to transcribe it to piano, to guitar, it just wasn't working. So anyway, I befriended S.T. Joshi, and he did some edits on this manuscript, helped me with some of the language in it, the period language, which was great. And then I asked him, I said, S.T., I got a weird question. I know you're a string instrument player. Do you think if I sent you something I hummed into a recording, you could maybe transpose it into a viola piece? And he said, yeah, it's worth a shot. And S.T. Joshi, I just have to mention, is an extraordinarily generous individual with his time. He's been so helpful to me, to Curtis, I know too. And to even do a project like this, I was just so honored that he even accepted. And so anyway, I sent him this hummed recording of, the music in my mind. And in like 2 days, he sent back to me this, basically he had run this through like a synth thing and a music program. And then he had done some editing and fixed it up and sent back to me, which was basically 90% of the piece of music that was in my head. I mean, there were some things that were different, but it was eerie to hear. And so he also sent me the actual pages, not just the recording. And so I had done a series of paintings called Primary Sources, where I had done all these different documents. This was like 13 years ago. And part of it was like I had stained them with tea. Like I did a document of Robespierre when they came in to arrest him, and he was shot in the jaw and there was blood all over this document. So I done a replica of that. Anyway, I'd done all this tea staining, and I'd done the frontispiece of Mozart's Requiem as a music score. So I had some experience doing some of this. So I thought, I'm going to write this out as if it were a piece of music that the protagonist had written and had maybe it sat at the bottom of a violin case or viola case for years. And so that's basically what that was. I took that music that he sent me and made this art piece basically out of it, and then was able to use it as the end papers for that, which was just such a cool collaboration to do, with S.T. Joshi, but to make that actual music come alive and to have it be thematically something that if the violist did open that up and tried to play it, what was in the book, it is the piece itself.
That's awesome. Have you had anyone play it for you?
No, I've been talking with some people. It's hard to find violists sometimes. I do know a couple, and I've talked to them, but I haven't gotten the recordings yet. But that's sort of in the works. So I'm hoping at some point to do it and actually really, put out there a sort of a companion piece of a live recorded version on an actual instrument. That would be great.
That would be, if you get that, let us know.
Oh, we'll do indeed.
Put links for everybody to check it out. But yeah, you're just an awesome all around guy. You have so many cool things going on.
Oh, that's very kind, Bill. Thank you.
Well, okay, guys, going on an hour and a half here, and need to let this guy go. But it has been so much fun diving into your head and getting to experience. Well, they'll be able to experience when they go to it your music. I've already done that. Some of your artwork, all of your books. Jenny, I've loved learning about you. Yes, and the history. You got some questions for? You need Victorian. He's got you. Send him a message. Say hi.
Please do. I'm happy to chat with anybody. Yeah.
And outside of your website, is there anywhere else that you like to have people try to get a hold of you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, my social media is all linked through my website, and so I mean, please say hello if you'd like. My email is joshuarexart, art@gmail.com for anybody that wants to email me too. Happy to chat there. And I just wanted to say to you, this is just a wonderful show, and you've been such a gracious host. And thank you so much for having me. This has been a really wonderful experience, though.
Oh, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you guys next time in a month. And I have no idea who we're having on yet. So send me ideas if you have some. If you want to come on the show, let me know. And take care, everybody. Happy Sunday. Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Steve Van Samson,
Curtis M. Lawson,
Paul Christian Glenn, Joshua Rex, Raz, Rob Smale,